Continuing in the series, we now turn our attention to the challengers, and I had the opportunity to sit down with Mike Herrera, who is challenging for place 2 on the ballot, and this is our conversation. I hope you'll enjoy it here on Lean In Leander.
Lantern Media Studio for the continuation of the Vote in Leander series here on Lean in Leander. And with me today is Mike Herrera. Hi, Mike.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
So this is the first time Mike and I have had a conversation outside of some emails that we've sent, which is typical with the new candidates. And Mike is presenting himself to the citizens of Leander as a representative for place 2 on the city council.
That's correct.
So, welcome to the candidate forum, I guess. So we'll kind of proceed from here. For those of you who have watched this before, the next subsequent interviews will all be with candidates who are presenting themselves for the first time. So our approach here is very similar to what we do with the incumbents, but obviously I have more familiarity with the incumbents. And Mike and I are sitting down for really the first time. His wife is outside. I met them. Lovely, lovely people. And so, this is just the conversation. This is what we do at Vote in Leander and help you as citizens of the city to better know and understand some of the motivating factors that our candidates bring to the table. So, again, Mike, thank you so much. I appreciate you making the time. Officially the first candidate that I'm talking to. So you and I were having a little chat before we started here today, and you were telling me you've been in Leander for about 5 years. So give me the origin story for Mike Herrera.
So, how I came to Leander? Or
like what brought you here, where are you from?
Right. So I was born in Stockton, California.
Okay.
And when I was about 7, my mom moved to Aurora, Colorado. And I went through high school and everything there, and then I was going to college there. And then my grandfather was having heart problems, so I moved back to Stockton, worked at his grocery store, an AM/PM mini market, worked there for a few years for him, and then he sold the business. And at that point, I had California residency, so I stayed there. And I went to college there, and I graduated from California State University Stanislaus, which is in Turlock. I like to call it Turkey Tech. They get upset when you say that. The school started literally in a turkey shed at the fairgrounds.
All right.
And,
okay.
So then when I graduated college, I got a job with Nestle Beverage Company, and I moved up to the San Francisco Bay Area. And I worked for them for about a year and a half, and then they promoted me to be a route sales supervisor, and they moved me to New Jersey. And then I supervised an area in New Jersey, and then I basically got a promotion from there to an account manager, to a zone analyst, to a regional sales manager. And so at that point, we'd moved the office to Pennsylvania, and I covered from basically Maine to South Carolina to Chicago, and I did all the headquarters calls for them selling gourmet coffee. And I'm not much of a coffee drinker, but I was selling gourmet coffee, whole bean coffee. And then I met my wife, and we got married, and so she lived in Dallas.
There you go.
And so she sold it. Well, we kept the house in Dallas for a year or two, but she basically sold all her belongings and moved into my little apartment in Pennsylvania, and we started a business. She started a business, and then I quit my job with Nestle and went to work for her. And so that was basically, we got married in 1995. She started the business 2 months after we got married, and our anniversary was actually Monday.
Oh, really?
So
happy anniversary. How many years now?
29.
Wow. Okay.
And so May 18th will be the 29th anniversary of the company. So she started the company. I quit Nestle a year later, went to work for her, and then I've been basically running her company for the last 29 years. And so what we do, so during that, when I started dating her, well, we came out to Austin to visit her brother. He picked us up at the old airport, because it's funny because I flew to the old airport, and then you fly back a couple years later, and it's like, this
it's
is
a completely different place. That's actually one of those things that we talk about on this, because it's the expansion and the growth in Central Texas has been, it's when you take a look at it and you really consider the changes, it's like that's pretty monumental at the end of the day. Like having an entirely new airport, right? That's crazy, right? But go on. You were saying you're visiting brother, right? Your brother in Austin?
No, my brother-in-law, her brother.
Her brother in Austin.
And stuff. So that we'd come out here every single Christmas, and so my nephews and nieces all live here, and so the whole family's kind of down here. And so then, about 10 years ago, my mom calls my wife Diane and says, "We're thinking about moving to Pennsylvania." And she goes, "Why would you do that?" She says, "Oh, to be near you. You know, when you guys are going to retire there." And she says, "We're not retiring here. We're going to retire in Austin." So then my mom literally moved down here to Austin. She moved into Caprock within like 6 months. And so then at the time I'm like 50 years old, and she's going, "When are you getting down here?" I go, "Mom, I'm 50. I'm not retiring yet."
Right.
And so then basically through that, we ended up moving down here. We had an apartment for a time in Cedar Park, and a place called the Allure. When they first opened that up,
right,
we were in there. I really liked their resort style pool and everything. And then we bought the house that we live in now, which is in Fairways and Crystal Falls, and we've been there for five and a half years and things. So that's how we ended up here.
It's an interesting story. I mean, so you were in retail adjacent with the coffee sales, right? I mean, right. I don't think you were like selling, into individual stores. It sounds like you had a higher.
Well, I did do a little bit of that, but mostly I do headquarters calls. But I'd call on little 3-store chains or
right.
individuals.
Right.
You got to learn to sell. I mean, a funny story is first time I go, they make me a salesperson, and I call on this guy. His name's Don Kirby. I can't remember what chain he's with. So I call him. I get him on the phone. And the first thing he starts asking me, he says, "You work for Nestle? You're the guys that kill the babies in India." And I'm going, "What are you talking about?" And I get off the phone. The guy's like really mad at me.
Right.
I don't know what you're even talking about.
Right.
And it turns out that there was this whole incident back, I think, in the 80s or something, and where they sent stuff and they used bad water with it, and babies got sick. And so I ended up later on, he ended up buying our product. But I went to my boss. I said, This is what the sales are going to be like?
Yeah, that's sales. That is sales. You're supposed to know everything and nothing at the same time. So, yeah, I can completely relate to that type of thing because I had similar experiences when I first started to be in sales. Like my sales experience was through hospitality. So I first started in the hotel business, right? Mm-hmm. And I didn't know anything about it, like nothing. I remember Greg Posmentori was a friend of mine. He was a friend of a friend, actually. And I was looking for a job, and I had babies. I had little kids. And he's like, calls me up. He's like, "Hey, Alex tells me you're looking for a job." And I was like, "Yeah, It's like, "Well, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, what do you need?" Right? And he's like, "Well, I have a need for some salespeople. What do you know about the hotel business?" And I'm like, "Well, the only thing I know about hotels is when you check in, and do they have breakfast? Like, that's it. Like, those are the only two things that I generally ask." He goes, "Oh, you're perfect. Come on in." So that's where it started. But yeah, it was a great way to kind of learn the benefits of doing that, obviously. And I think you might concur here is that you very quickly ascertain whether or not you have the acumen for the methodology, right? Because there's a methodology to sales. They say, "Oh, anybody can be a salesman." I really don't believe that. At the end of the day, you have to have a certain acumen. You have to understand people. You have to have an affinity for the psychology of the process, right? Mm-hmm. And then you also have to understand the methodology that there's work. It's not like you just show up and knock on the door, and you have to do a lot of discovery, a lot of prospecting, right? There's a ton of no's for every yes, and that takes time. But you get a really good thick skin. And then in my case, like, I don't know if you would agree, but you learn servant leadership. Like, you really learn it's not about you. It's not what you're trying to achieve. It's, how are you helping this business? How are you helping them achieve their, goals and aspirations per se? I mean, Nestle's a little bit of a different situation, but.
Well, it's CSSI Solutions, which we call ourselves now. That's what we did. I mean, we started out the company and we basically did the partner sell, where basically what we did is we gave away free information, and people would, and free was not associated with what we were doing. And you could actually get away with putting free in the subject line when I did this, and people reacted. And we literally launched a website, sent out 800 cold emails and had 200 people register within 3 days.
Oh, wow.
And the thing is because nobody for this product would give away anything free. And so we were giving away free reports, basically custom reports for them for the software.
Right.
And we built our business on that. And so our whole thought is we're going to show you how you can do things, knowing you can go do it yourself. But the reality is that you probably don't want to do that.
Right.
And so you'll just hire us to do it, and that's easier. And so we grew our business on that. And we became a trusted partner with most of the companies. And so we grew from a consulting company into a back office operations company, into cloud hosting, into software development, and all that. And so we have a portal software, we have our cloud hosting, we have our back office operations, and we do process reviews, integration work, and all that. So we have about 43 people. We have offices in 2 states, and we have people operating basically in 6 states. And we're pretty well known in the investment advisory business for what we do.
So is that's the business that your wife started, right? Is her background in that area? Like she's come up, learned the trade, if you will, through an investment type background, or?
So she had worked for IBM.
Okay, IBM. That's all you need to say. To me, that's all you need to say.
For IBM, she worked for Coopers & Lybrand as a consultant,
Okay,
and then
yeah.
she worked for a firm called Mozart, and she did a bunch of work for them. And she ended up, at that time, it's kind of interesting. I mean, because we basically launched our company in 1995, which is basically the start of the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we were doing at that time is we were basically creating front ends for desktop applications for mainframe systems,
Right.
which quickly moved into web applications interacting with mainframe things. So we started doing that. So we were kind of there. We were doing a lot of stuff with .coms through there. But within there, she had worked on some different banking systems and things. And then there was a large mutual fund company that wanted to launch an advice part of their business within their bigger company.
Right.
And they had her come in and do a vendor analysis. They picked the software, an admin product called Access at the time. And so they bought that, and then they asked her to help them implement it. So she went in and implemented it. And then we sat there, because at the time we were doing all this other stuff. We were doing like web development and all this stuff.
Right. As everybody was at the time, right?
And then what we did is she realized that we could build a business around. So then we basically transitioned our whole company from our first niche to our second niche in about 98. So about 3 years in. And then any of the programmers that didn't want to stick around, we let them run out their contracts or run out what we were doing, the projects, and then they could leave. But most of them didn't leave. They stuck around. And then we basically started doing it, working in the financial services area. And then we basically kind of grew that. And so which, I'd like to say, hey, I was smart, but, we, on the .com crash, we didn't get hurt so much because we were already transitioning out. I know a lot of people that got burnt. And then when 2008 hit, I mean, that was really interesting. I was at the Schwab conference when everything collapsed, and there were probably maybe 5,000 advisors there on the first day.
Mm-hmm.
And we were down to like 1,000 on the third day. I mean, everybody went home because they had to deal with it. And I thought for sure, it's like, oh, this is going to be bad for us. But the nice thing is we do good in up markets and we do good in bad markets. In an up market, people have money to spend and they want to make improvements. And when down market, they want to basically protect what they have and reduce their costs. And so we can help them on either way. So it's worked out well on that. And then we had some good contracts that came in at the right times and things. And now we're kind of in this phase where we've transitioned over trying to become more of a software company. And it's hard. If you're a consulting company, you solve problems, and give us a problem, we'll solve it. Software is I'm going to design something to solve all your problems, and you're going to operate different. It's a completely different way to do things.
It is. My experience, again, like I said, I started out in hospitality, and back in the day, I had an opportunity to work with a Macintosh developer, and it's a company called Catron Software. We did organizational charting and flow charting and things of that nature. And there wasn't a whole lot of people doing that. So it was very, very niche. But we had Kodak and Polaroid, which were big Mac houses at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what was interesting about that is that, when you follow that, like you were just describing your business process and some of the experiences that you had, you were rather fortunate because you had made some adjustments that a lot of other companies didn't make, right? You didn't do it with any intent, it sounds like. Sounds like you just kind of naturally progressed that way. Mm-hmm. But they protected your overall business, investments because you were already kind of ahead of the pack, right? It sounds like that. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Well, no, I mean, we kind of were on some of the things because there's a lot of people that copy what we do now, but now the market's kind of gone this way, and now we sat down and came up with a strategic plan 10 years ago. We basically implemented most of that, except for one part, and now we're sitting down and we're saying, okay, where do we need to be?
Right.
Because certain parts of our offerings are aging.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
I mean, I hate software as a service, and I sell software as a service. I hate paying somebody every month for something,
Right.
and I don't own it. It bothers me.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, again, like in my current role, one of the things that is interesting about the company that I work with, which is Charter Communications, is they are kind of real reticent to do cloud-based stuff, right? So it's back to an environment that is on-prem, right?
Mhm.
Which is different than what I was doing when I first got to Austin, because when I was working with a lot of startups and doing a lot of consulting on business development, they're all cloud, right? I mean, it's like there's no hardware anywhere anymore, right?
Right.
So that's been a little bit of a change from that perspective. So I kind of relate to what you're talking about. I can kind of see, there's some opportunities there to maybe explore that conversation a little bit more. But that's your wife's business, and you're running the show from that perspective. So does she just get to sit back and
no.
and just make decisions, or?
Well, I mean, she's the president of the company, but she's also the best consultant. So she actually works with customers all the time.
Okay, so she's still actually engaging, right?
Oh yeah, she's totally client facing.
Oh, that's great.
Always has been.
That's fantastic.
She lets me do the hiring and firing,
Right.
and make sure the bills get paid,
Right.
and all the accounting. And then I also do a lot of business development. So I get hands on in things. I work on the different processes. We recently went through we got SOC 2 certified for our organization like 3 years ago, and so that was a challenge.
Right.
And so for her on that, she just has to follow the processes we've come up with, and but that to me was eye opening, because we had to come up with all this different risk analysis, alternatives, go through some different things. I mean, we'd already done a lot of this when we started our back office operation in 2005. There we have to do it every morning.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the big things is back east is we'd have snowstorms. And,
Right.
And so growing up in Colorado, I'd always be like, well, suck it up, come to work. But the reality is like, well, no, Mike, that's not the safe thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
People need to be, you need to take safety into consideration, and we need to take care of the customer. So we got to where we could operate from home. So when COVID hit,
You were already there.
we were already there, and it
Yeah.
wasn't a big deal. And then when, during COVID, some of our leases expired, and we let the leases go, and we were looking at space to go back in, but then most of the people were like, no, we'd rather work from home. And I said, well, that's fine. I don't think it's wise, but, we'll do it, because I do think that working from home is, I think it's bad for the employee. I think that it doesn't allow them to establish a relationship with the firm or with other individuals. And so what happens is the experienced people do fine.
Right.
That already established things, but the younger people won't get the stickiness with the people or the job.
Yep.
And because when you learn about people's kids, you talk to them in the office, you have lunch with them, you're less likely to let them go. But when they're just an extension, and that's what you see companies doing, they're just like, well, let's just get rid of all these guys over here.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I think I can definitely relate to the perspective there, right? Having been remote for many years now, I was remote a long time before COVID, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because just recently for me, they made us go back in 5 days, right? And I'm like, I haven't worked in an office environment like this consistently 5 days a week in like 12 years. I mean, I haven't done this. It's been a little bit of a reacclimation to that. But I do see what you're saying, because there's a benefit there. There is the benefit of the, like you said, the stickiness, the opportunity to have those.
The cross-pollination, all
Yeah,
that stuff that
you're having
happens.
conversations, and you can kind of just turn, and it's every day. We had a really nice hybrid model. So if any of my bosses are ever listening to this, I really like the hybrid model. I thought that was perfect, but it is what it is. No, that's super, super interesting. I think hopefully it gives our viewers actually a great deal, in my opinion, of insight into some of the thought process, right? It's reflective of the way that you process information, deal with challenges, work through different scenarios and things of that nature, which is basically what you end up doing in any kind of civic role, which is right actually what we're here to talk about, right? It's a great precursor to a follow-up interview about your business, to be honest, because I'd love to explore that with you. But let's talk a little bit about that. Like from that perspective, you've relocated to Austin. You've now been here 5 years. You've been looking at some of the changes and some of the challenges that exist, not only here in Leander, but in Central Texas as a whole. So what in that set of experiences, and let's just say over the last 5 years, what there has made you say, you know what? Let me get involved here. Like, what is it that's motivating you?
Well, so there's a few things. So, I served on the Leander LASD bond steering committee for the last set of bonds. And so I sat on that. I went through the whole process, and I thought it was very interesting. CFO ask them questions, ask Dr. Gearing questions, and kind of the guidelines they gave us, and then meeting with all the different organizations and kind of going through, hey, what are we doing here? What are the demographics of this and all that? And I thought it was very interesting. I like that kind of stuff, I guess, and things. I think we went a little heavy on the bonds, but you know what? It is what it is. But the thing I found disappointing in that is Dr. Gearing said, hey, let's look at it really hard and let's see if we can come up with some different models of what to do. And we didn't do any of that. We just basically took what they gave us and approved it. And we didn't say, do we need a high school that has everything, or can we have a different kind of high school? Because that's what he posed to us when we first started the process, but we never really went there. I would have liked to seen us do a little more of that, just to, and then even to see what the reaction is. But that's not what happened.
Interesting, because let me get into that a little bit more. So this was committee work, right? That you were doing, and I'm assuming that the committee was rather diverse group of people. How many folks were on that committee?
So on the steering committee, I don't know. I got appointed. Right. They asked me, and so I think each commissioner got to appoint 2 people or one person. I'm not sure if it was 1 or 2.
Okay.
And so I think there's 6 commissioners. So then there'd be 12 people.
Okay. And was that were you meeting as a group? All of you got together and did some brainstorming, did some whiteboarding? How did that work?
Well, we met in the kickoff meeting with all the subcommittees, because they have a subcommittee for the high school, for junior high, and so they all bring their needs up. And so then we have a meeting where they all bring their needs up. It's like 3 nights in a row. Then what we do is I think it was 3, we maybe did it in 2. And then we take their information and we go off, and then we had a meeting with the CFO and Dr. Gearing, the group of us, and kind of go over the priorities, and they kind of show us a way that we can kind of prioritize and come up with things. And then we had a couple of follow-on meetings, and then they really wanted to get we were kind of rushed. We basically, did it in 2.5 weeks, because we had to get it in. We had to agree on what we were going to do, because they wanted to vote on it on the 21st or something, and all this. And so when we got to the end, it was more of how do we do this? So we did the dots method. I learned a lot. It was very interesting. I learned a lot of ways how they narrow things. I also learned a little more about how, I actually said this is what I would like, and I voted the way I would like, versus trying to, if I knew we were going to use averages, maybe I go higher or lower, those kind of things, because that's what a bunch of people did, and so and things, or I would have taken all my dots and put them on one item to ensure that it was there. Instead, I spread them around what I thought was important.
Right.
So, but it was rushed. I think I think the demographics, they've missed it on the demographics quite a bit, a few times, and they've reused, or they've changed the purpose of the previous bonds, which there's nothing really wrong with that, but it kind of is disappointing that you go out and you get more money than you actually need, and then your demographics come in a certain way, and then you kind of switch it to other things. I think in the community impact this last time, there's a whole thing about how they repurposed a bunch of things for, I think, early childhood or things like that.
Right.
And things which weren't in, or I can't remember the exact details.
Right.
I haven't stayed on top of that process.
Right.
Because now I'm doing stuff with the city. And so from that, I got appointed to the LPAC in TERS. So then I've been on LPAC since, I think it's October 22nd, 22. And so that was interesting going on that. And that committee was really struggling with, I would say, its relationship with the city. And there was just a lot of not listening to each other,
Mm-hmm.
and the structure was not conducive really to get things done. And so was that, so one part of the group would say, hey, that's on purpose. The other part of it might say, hey, we're being dysfunctional.
Right.
And it's somewhere in the middle. But we worked last year pretty good, and we got a lot of that fixed. And so now we're working really well with the city and all that. So in that process, we had some subcommittees. I got put in charge like fundraising. I'm on the, I can't remember all the subcommittees I'm on, but so I ended up going. So in those meetings, I started meeting with different people at the city
Right.
about different things. So like, for instance, I would meet with Mr. Powers about the fundraising thing because I wanted us to be able to have people donate to LPAC for LPAC events. And so how are we going to do that? And how are we going to collect the money? And how is this all going to work? What's the process? And they worked with us, and then we discovered something where a way they could do it, and they've implemented it. And so it's worked out good. They put us in the budget. The way they were recognizing money, they were saying, hey, you're going to have this money, but the money's really not there because all the things are only funded when the event happens.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are potential events, and so we didn't understand that.
Mm-hmm.
The open meeting stuff.
Yeah, that's a hassle.
Kind of makes it where you play communication.
It
I
does.
email you and you email everybody else, and I don't know what they say. And if
Right.
you're not good at if we're not, it's a big circle and it's hard
It is hard.
and things. So the part of that was a meeting with them and just going to the city council meetings and stuff. It's like, you know what, I would like to run for office, and I've never run for office before, and it makes sense for it. And I didn't want to run. So the reason I'm running for place 2, I don't have anything against anybody on the thing, but I had to pick a spot. And I did not want to run against the person that I'm on LPAC with, which is Nicole.
Uh-huh.
And then I learned that one of the new people on the thing was going to run for place 6, and I didn't want to be mayor. And so, that left too. I mean, I don't want to be the face of the city.
Right. No, and one of the things that I always like to point out, and I'm glad you said that because that kind of helps me segue into this. This is strictly a volunteer position. So, when you're on council, it is much like the committees that exist in the city that are created by council. They, in a sense, are advisory from that perspective, right? They're not necessarily. It's a little different because there's two main focuses of anybody on or any council. It's like budgetary and then the ordinances, right? So you're kind of, how are we spending the money and how are we creating the rules, right?
Right, except for LPAC. So it's interesting because LPAC is the one committee that actually has a budget.
Yes.
Actually goes out and does things. So
Yep.
they say, hey, we're going to have an MLK march and an event there. And they go out and they get vendors and you do it. So it's like you're running a community events and you're doing these things.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else, they go and they approve things or don't approve things. And then the city council can do whatever they want with, they can vote up or down on it based on their recommendation.
Right.
But LPAC is the one, because I was like thinking, wow, this is a lot of work. So if I actually won, when I win, I will have less work to do than I'd have to do with LPAC.
Right.
Because
help people really quick. So LPAC is Leander
Parks
and Recreation.
Parks, Culture Commission.
Arts, Culture. Leander Parks,
Arts and Culture Commission.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And so basically what we're responsible for is to have art in the city and then also have cultural events or embrace culture in the city. And we have a budget for that, but we also get allocated funds from whenever there's a new development and a certain amount of it has to go to it. And then there's also, if the city adds a building, we get a certain percentage of that. And so there's kind of a finite amount of money.
Right.
Because it's like once you sell all the land.
Right. Then there's no longer a funding mechanism for that. I think at that point in time, you probably just amend or change the ordinance that does that.
Well, you'd actually probably be in the budget. At that point.
That's true. I guess that could happen.
Or you could get endowed by different things. I mean, that's one of the challenges that we have on LPAC is that, the city doesn't have a strong vision for the arts. We have a strong vision for parks, but not necessarily for arts. And when you think about having a venue where you could have a concert or this or that, there really aren't any.
Right.
I mean, you're going to Cedar Park. I mean, I'm not saying we build another HEB center up here.
Right.
But maybe someplace where you could have, 200 people or 150 people
Right.
sit there on stage. I mean, you can go to I think the high school or some of the things like that, but there's not a lot of things like that, and there's really not a lot of plans or really a vision for it.
Yeah, I can't remember where I was exposed to that. I mean, I didn't work directly with LPAC on anything, but there were the Lakewood project, the installations there, right?
With the statue garden?
Right, right. So I had some exposure to that early on, and I actually covered that in the podcast. It's one of the earliest episodes. And so we were talking about what that could potentially do. And again, when you have, like with LPAC, and it's kind of, I think from the city's perspective, I can understand. Again, the exposures that I've had, I get it. I understand it now. But one of the things that's a little frustrating about many of the committees outside of LPAC is that there is no budget, right? So again, you very much play an advisory role. You're having conversations. You're trying to surface thought process, ideation, and then potentially presenting it to the city as, hey, here's something that we should look at, right? Here's something that we think would be able to benefit whatever target there is. LPAC has a little bit of a different purpose, right? Because there you're actually like, okay, we have $50,000, I think it was. I can't remember what.
Well, so in the permanent fund for permanent art, there's like 250,000.
Right. Okay, so you're working with that, and you're saying, okay, how can we best utilize this budget to have the greatest impact for the community at large? So, I mean, that's the difference with the LPAC as compared to some of the other committees or advisories that exist within the city. It's great exposure to the process, right? I mean, from the city, from understanding how city staff engages and things of that nature, that's a great exposure piece, right? That's a really good way to understand that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've learned a lot about the city, how the city operates, the good and the bad. I mean, generally, I don't have anything negative to say about the city staff. I think they do the best they can with the resources they have. I think the city is cash strapped. I think that they don't have enough money coming in, and so they have to make trade-offs on what they're going to do. And so, and they won't say it, but the reality is that in some cases maybe they want to put 2 stoplights in 2 spots in the city, but they're going to put 1 because that's what they can afford.
Right.
Or they're going to widen this road when they really should widen 4 roads. Or they should, and to me that's because they just don't have enough revenue and it goes back to the sales tax.
Right.
And that they're not getting enough money out of their sales tax, and most of our sales tax money is going to Cedar Park. I mean, when you look at it, we underrun them. So I sat down, I figured if you're a resident of Austin, you do all your shopping there. So whatever per capita they're paying in sales tax, that's what we should be getting in our city. And so you take that number is what we should be getting, and then you basically subtract that from what Cedar Park's getting, and it works out to about, I think, $65 million, $70 million over the last 4 years. Then you add in the Cap Metro thing, you're talking about $100 million that left the city. And you can argue about the benefit of Cap Metro, but we don't really talk about what the benefit is, the real benefit to the city as far as like, what do we get back for what we put in? And then you project that forward the next 3 to 4 years. That's another $150 million if we don't develop stuff right. And the sales tax does go up. We still give 1% to Cap Metro. Now you're talking over an 8-year period, $250 million that could have been invested in Leander, that left Leander, or could have be given back to the taxpayer. And so, to me, that's the thing. But the city does a good job with what they have. I just wish they had more.
Right, and I think that's a fair point. I think that I mean, you bring up a very particular way of viewing it, right? And part of that, I think, to be fair, when you're looking at tax revenues, whether they be property tax, really the only one that you can isolate, I think, in that case, right, is property tax, because property tax is based on the homes that are being built, and that's primarily what was driving a lot of the growth in the greater Leander area for a good extended period, well beyond 5, 6, 8 years, right? There was a lot of new houses being built. It was the suburbs, right? But as the growth pushed further north, well, then the more, I'd say, sub-commercial, I don't want to necessarily say commercial, because that type of large industrial commercial growth was not in this corridor. It was in the 45 corridor and east, right? It wasn't really up this route. So you have complementary commercial development, right? and those businesses are now pushing north. So now it's our opportunity in Leander. I think it's arguable to build the type of development that encourages those types of businesses to come here. And we don't have that. It's coming. And some of that we can control.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that is just going to be the natural progression, right? We don't necessarily have a whole lot of say from a city perspective as to, how that growth comes. That growth is coming anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important that we've diversified the tax bases, right? I think that's an important piece of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Would you agree, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting because, I was looking at something the Leander Foundation put together.
Mm-hmm.
And what they did is Carlos St. James
Mm-hmm.
put together this whole thing of all the municipalities around here and where they get their money. And it's broken down by fees, property tax, and all this other stuff, and sales tax.
I haven't had a chance to look at all that yet, by the way.
But you should look at it because it's actually very enlightening, because just looking at that, because almost all the cities around us get 22 to 20% of their revenue from their sales tax, and we get 4%.
Right.
And
right.
so the thing is if we're going to stay at 4%, that means we have to get the money from somewhere else, or it means that our budget shrinks. And so the reality is that we charge a lot of fees, development fees, and
Sure.
all that. And
Sure.
I haven't gone through all that and kind
Right.
of analyzed it, but it's just a simple graph like that. It's like that's the difference.
It is the difference, and again, I don't think it's unfair to call it out. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's
Well,
definitely what we're dealing with, right?
And that would be the job of the city council, to promote that information to the city, to the people of the city, so that they can actually make coherent decisions about
Right.
different things. Because I think what happens is that we communicate, but people don't necessarily listen. And,
Right.
and I'm not saying
Right.
if I knew how to tell everybody one thing, I'd be a marketing genius.
Right,
But,
right.
But the reality is that people get their information in different ways. We do have one kind of neutral source. Community impact is a fairly neutral source that everybody gets. And I think that, one of my things is that I think in that we should have some kind of key performance indicators that we put in there. We run an ad on a quarterly basis, and we highlight the things that are important to our citizens, and we share that with them. And that way we say, hey, we told you this is going on. And so it's not a surprise or
Right.
whatever, but we see the value we're getting. And if new businesses, and we actually, I have no idea. Who is the top taxpayer in Leander? But you know what? We should give them kudos.
Right. Well, I would surmise, okay, based on, my understanding of some of the drivers out here,
Mhm.
From a sales tax perspective, mind you,
Yeah.
okay, it's going to be HEB, it's going to be
Mhm.
Lowe's, right?
Mhm.
I think when Home Depot comes online, it'll be Home Depot,
Mhm.
right? So you have to look at some of the larger, I think you can maybe throw like a Kohl's in there, anywhere there's going to be a larger retail spend, because that's where that sales tax is coming
Yeah.
from necessarily. And I think there's opportunity there to also take a look at, some of the investment that we've done, long-term effects of some of that.
Mhm.
Because I do agree with you. I think we do attrit a certain amount of our sales tax, but that's based on the fact that we just don't have the things that people need here, right? That's
Mhm.
changing. I think as that further changes, I would argue that that's one of the reasons Cedar Park is doing the Bell development, is to hold on to some of that tax revenue, right?
Mhm.
They see it. They see
Well,
it.
they're revitalizing that area.
Yeah,
that's-
well, they have to do that. They have to have another reason, because let's be honest, if I drive from, if I go down to the Domain area, right,
Mhm.
and I'm driving up 183, what am I hitting on the way up 183, right? I'm hitting arguably the Arboretum area, right? What's there? There's some stuff. Then I'm going into the Lakeline area, right? Well, what's there? There's some retail. There's a Home Depot there, right?
Mhm.
There's the mall, which you can argue whether or not it's probably still a pretty strong contributor, I would imagine, but to what degree? Not the same as it was 15 years ago, right?
Right.
So then you look at that and you say, okay, that's Cedar Park, and then you move a little bit further up, and now you're in Leander, and Leander's development was primarily as a bedroom community initially, and now there's at least an idea of, okay, hey, we need to diversify a little bit here, because while you could, and we've had these conversations, because I've been on several committees, most recently the Economic Development Committee, and we talked about this, right? we talked about the fact that you make a decision as a city. It's like, what do you want to do as a city, right? How do you want to, rely on, what funding mechanisms do you want to rely on long term, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you could make a choice to say, you know what, we just want to be a bedroom community and we want to rely on property tax.
Right.
Well, that's fine and sure, and you make that decision, you live with that, right? I think maybe, and I will want to speak to this because I don't have the specifics, but I think maybe downstream a few years back, those may be some of the thinking, right? But then you get to the situation now where you have multiple variants and things that you can't control, state legislature, et cetera, making these changes to the property taxes, right? So you're a city, you're relying on your property tax, and all of a sudden the legislature says, you know what, we're going to change that, right? So as a city, you don't really control that, right? So now you have a smaller revenue stream that you had counted on that you had built in the first place. Mm-hmm. So that's why I say when I have these conversations, like this is the reason we need to diversify, right? This is the reason that we need to find what we can in our niche for the 39 some odd square miles that Leander occupies. What kind of land do we have? What kind of development opportunities do we have? Mm-hmm. And to your point earlier, when we are having those development opportunities, how can we creatively find mechanisms that help us with other things that we need to do because of some of the decisions that we're living with, and we have to figure out how to work with that, right? Mm-hmm. And then also forward thinking where, okay, now we've kind of realized these things. How do we prevent this from A, reoccurring, and B, having some longevity in the way that we establish what we're doing today, 10 years from now, 15 years, 20 years from now. Mm-hmm. Because I've talked about this pretty much to the person with everybody on council at some point or another. It doesn't matter what we're doing today, right? What we're doing today is for tomorrow. And if once you and I decide Leander's not where we want to live or whatever happens, the city stays, right? It keeps going, right? So you want to try to be, in my opinion, and I don't want to speak for you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you want to be, when you're putting yourself in the position that you're putting yourself, you're saying, hey, I want to help be a steward of what we're doing for the future, right? You have to take that into account, right? And you bring up some very, very good points. I don't think that it's necessarily something that everybody always agrees on, right? But that's okay. That's okay.
Some people don't want to see any development, and some people want to see all kinds of development.
Right.
But we do have a lot of people with buying really expensive houses out here, and they really don't have food options or luxury options out in this area.
I think that's a big missing component. In my opinion, that's a miss right now. I think there's opportunity there.
And the question is, so how do you do that? How do you actually attract that kind of business? Because what we will end up with, and this is not just true of Leander. This is But I see it in Texas. I didn't see this a lot in Pennsylvania, but you guys have a lot of mattress stores and a lot of dental places and in retail locations.
Right.
And typically in other areas of the country, they're not in those areas. They're in other areas, commercial areas.
Right.
And then you have other types of retail business in there.
I agree.
And things. And so that's one of the things. But I think the question becomes, how do we attract top-tier developers to this area to partner with the city and with our chamber in order to get them. And so, and by top tier, I mean people that are ready, that are funded and can come in and do the project instead of lining up. And for the people that own the land, they get to develop with whoever they want.
Right.
And the question becomes, can we introduce them to good partners where they'll get higher value? If they want to keep their land in a certain way, then that's their prerogative. But if they have an opportunity and they say, oh, you know what, I like what they're doing, and I'm willing to get behind this project, that's what we do. And I think that's part of the role of the city council with the city and the chamber and the developers around here to kind of look at that and do a better job. Because what I feel is that we're very close to Cedar Park, and why would you put something in Cedar Park and put it in Leander? So you'll probably put it in Liberty Hill. Georgetown and Round Rock are pretty well built out. I mean, they have other areas they can around their fringes, and they'll continue to grow. But Leander's kind of stuck in a tight spot. And the thing is that when we look at a lot of our arrangements in the area, we don't get the best deals. When we look at the water deal, we own 47% of Brushy Creek, but we own 100% of the problem when there's a problem.
Right.
And so maybe we could work on that relationship a little better and get it to where because we will have problems. They will crop up.
Right.
And it's a matter of thing. And then when you look at some of the other arrangements that we have related to our infrastructure and all that, could we do a better job? Could we take over some of these areas? Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? I know they look at that
Right.
and things, but I think that's more of where I kind of think that we have to work around the edges of where we're at because we have contracts, they have charters. You can go and work on them and make them better. They do change them from time to time.
Right.
And if we can basically communicate what we need and that we're willing to step up for what we need, then maybe we can get some of these to be fairer for us. I mean, the Cap Metro agreement, they put that interlocal agreement in. Can we push them a little harder on what's it defined? Can we get them to get their buses to go a little further?
Right.
And things like that. Or can we contract with them for different things? With the money that they have.
Right.
So I think that's where we have to be within the agreements. And I think that from my perspective, and they may be doing this, but from my perspective as a citizen, I don't see it. And
right.
And I don't see it in the council meetings because, they present things different way, and I don't see it communicated through the thing. So that's where communication, I think, really becomes important for the city, because they could be doing all this stuff, and we just don't know. Yeah, and we could pat them all on the back and say good job, and we could not run against them.
Right.
But my feeling is that I think we need to push a little harder. And I'm not saying yelling and screaming and that kind of stuff. What I'm saying is that we sit down and talk about what we both want to accomplish. Cap Metro wants to have a rail system.
Right.
We can work with them on it. That should actually be, we should work with our state legislature as a city
I do agree
to make
with
that
you
happen.
There. Yeah.
And we have 3 state representatives that represent Leander, and we should be able to get them. That's 3 votes. And then, I don't know how many represent Austin or whatever, but we should be able to put something together.
No, I think that's, I would concur. I mean, honestly, this is a really, really good conversation. I think it's something that I believe our audience, my audience, would appreciate, because these are the types of conversations that I really like to lean into, because it's informed, and it is not necessarily, what's the right word here?
Knee-jerk.
It's not knee-jerk. It's also not overly confrontational, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea of sitting down and having the conversation, again, this is the podcast, that's what we do, right? But the idea of having those conversations in continuity with other things, it's a complex issue. I don't ever say anything, or I try to avoid oversimplifying anything that's going on in the city. I think that there's a couple of things that that factor into it. The explosive exponential growth was that's a very, very difficult thing to deal with. And especially when you look at the structure that was there when that started, right? So to your point, city staff, they do the best that they can with what they have, right? But you're going from 30,000 to 100,000 in a blink of an eye, and that's just not something that's easy to deal with, especially when you have been working with. I don't want this is. I say this in a way I don't want to necessarily demean the small town mentality, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not the case. It's not what I'm saying. But when you're looking at things through that lens, right, and you take those lenses off, and all of a sudden there's this thing that's happening, it's kind of hard to make that change. Right? It's you're moving so much faster, and you're still trying to deal with things that you maybe had put into place or put into action 3-5 years ago. You're still trying to do that. That's the reality of a city, right? You're still trying to establish this thing. You're still trying to do these things, and then everything goes bananas, right? Everything goes crazy on you, and you're like, wait, we're still trying to do this, right? So I think that's part of it. And again, some of those factors we control, some of those factors we don't. Some of those are investment decisions. Some of them maybe should have been thought out a little bit more, right? Some of that you can't anticipate, right?
Having COVID sandwiched in the middle of
things, and then you have a pandemic right in the middle of that. It doesn't make it easy, right? But I would say this, and again, this is the first time you and I have had any conversation at all. I can appreciate your perspective. I really think that it's a good conversation from that, and it's asking questions that should be asked, right? We don't have enough insight into necessarily, and that's because of the way that the council works, and they have restrictions, right? There's a lot of things that the legislature puts in place that limits what they can and cannot say publicly. I think that is a miss. And that's not necessarily on Leander, that's on the state. Like, you're restricting the way that municipalities, I always mess that word up, can work. They should be able to be a little bit more transparent because it engages your population. It engages business owners. It engages people who are spending the money to buy the nice houses. If you're an independent, contractor, or you have your own business, or if you're the CEO of some company in Austin, right? Those people have exposure to a lot of these types of issues, and there's not a real mechanism that informs them, right? Not in a very public space. Like, yes, you can get involved, and if you do that, great. That's good. You can find the information, and better today than it was 5 years ago. I will say that, because when I first got here, that was one of my first things. Like, well, where's everything? Where's all the information, right? Where can I find? And it was difficult. It's still not easy, but it's there. Like, there's a lot more transparency today than there was 6 years ago when I first got here. So I think the city has been moving in the right direction from that perspective, but it's you're running behind the race leader, right? The race leader is the economy and the growth and all that stuff. That's well out in front of us, and we're trying to play catch up.
Right.
But again, the conversation points, the things that you've brought up in our conversation today, I think help the audience, help our folks see you and kind of understand your thought process, right? Which I think is really, really important. And then as a person too. I mean, obviously you're a very reasonable person sitting here, and
well, I didn't get a chance to give a plug for Chainbreakers. So Chainbreakers.
Oh yeah, that's right. We don't because I was really interested in this too. So it's more of a volunteer type thing.
Oh yeah. So it's basically Chainbreakers is an organization that goes into Williamson County Justice Center, for Juvenile Justice Center for kids, and we go to Central Texas Treatment Center. We do Bible studies in there, and we also shower the guards or the people there that work there with gifts and things like that related to and having parties with them. And so part of that is that I'm on the board of that. I've been on the board for a couple of years, and I also serve there. And I will say it's a joy going there. The kids are tough. And part of the reason the kids are tough is that they're in tough situations, and they're amenable to things, but you just feel like you're working with somebody, and then they're going to go right back to where they were. And a lot of it's environmental. Some of it's behavioral, but a lot of it's environmental. And you're just like, and you see the same kids coming back and back again. At the Central Texas Treatment Center, what they do is it's a diversion program, and so a first-time drug offender would get an option of either going to prison or going there. And basically, it's a no-touch facility. It's kind of like living in a dorm setting, but you have rooms. And there's men and women there, and they do all the work themselves and everything. And so typically what their typical day is, they go to classes. And so there's 3 phases they go through. One is that they identify their problem, and then they work on their problem, and then they solve their problem. I can't remember the exact details of it, but the thing there is that we've, that facility's reopened is for a year now, and we're seeing the first people get out of there, and they're going into 3-quarter houses. And we've seen change. I mean, because it's kind of interesting because you're coming in there and you see them when they first get there, and when they leave, when they go to 3-quarters, because they have to pay for it themselves, they go there, and most of them want to change their situation, and a lot of them, it's kind of interesting because there's a few of them from Waco in the facility, and they're going to be in Austin, and they're thinking they may not go back to Waco because the situation there is not for them. I mean, in my own day, I had my own issues. When I was about 24, I decided I wanted to change it. I moved 70 miles away from everybody, got my act together, graduated college and all that. And so I think there's a lot of value there. And so I will be at Juneteenth. If you come to the LPAC event Juneteenth, we'll have a booth there and come by and see us. And we're looking for, we want to take that a little further. We're partnering with different organizations that help them when they come out. Some of the people have jobs. They can go back to where they were. Some of them have nothing, and they're basically rebuilding from scratch. And so there's certain jobs that are available to them. There's certain trainings. Typically, they can go into trades fairly well and things and stuff. And so that's what, and that excites me. I mean, those are one of the things. I've done a lot of different things like this over the years through my church here and my church in Pennsylvania, where I was director of outreach at both churches for about the last 20 years. And that goes from building homes to feeding needy people, collecting coats, just all the different things.
Mm-hmm.
I've always felt like it's good to help people, and it's good to be with them. It's one thing to send money and all that, and we need money. For organizations need money, but when you go down and you meet people and you spend time with them, you learn that they're not that different than you, and it really comes down to sometimes a few decisions here and there,
Right.
some good luck, bad luck,
Right.
and things like that. And but it's very rewarding. And so anyways, that's.
Well, no, I'm glad you brought it up, and I apologize because you had mentioned you wanted to go there, and I forgot.
That's no problem.
That's on me. But so again, the community involvement, the desire to serve, again, servant leadership to me is something that is, I think, sometimes apparent, and then other times it's maybe a misnomer, like you don't really understand it. So I always like to kind of center some conversation around that desire to serve, because your reward is the experience and the advancement of the people who you're trying to help, right?
Mm-hmm.
To see them. It's not everybody, it's not all the time, but
right.
those ones that impact, right? Like you get involved because you want to help. And when you do help, it's rewarding, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's always with an effort to help. Not everybody necessarily will take the help, but that's not on you, right? That's not you.
And it's not my job to solve their problem. They have to own it and solve it themselves.
Right.
I can assist.
Yeah.
But I can't do it for them.
Yeah, you counsel and advise, but you can't solve, right? And it's funny because when you get into those situations, like you were talking about your business and, you solve problems and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Right. And you kind of try to apply the same, approach when you get into those, a community-based and juvenile, those types of issues. But it doesn't necessarily work the same way, right? Because you're dealing with kids, like what you said, and I was a kid. I remember being a kid, and, I was basically pretty much in a defensive posture for 10, 15 years, right? You're resistant, right? Because you think you know better,
Mm-hmm.
and until someone comes along and kind of helps you understand, there's a few things that you don't understand, and can learn. And then once that person reaches the point that they're, like, to your point, like, okay, I have to move 70 miles away to kind of figure this out. Well, then now those synapses open up, and you kind of start thinking it through a little bit differently. So I appreciate what you're doing there. I think it's a good reflection on who you are as a person. And I know we're almost at time, but I appreciate you taking the time to come in and meet with me. This has been a really lovely conversation, and I really appreciate you being as open and transparent as you have throughout our little give and take here, Q&A, so forth. Yeah. So I want to give you an opportunity, as I do all candidates, to kind of self-promote. So let people know where they can find you. What are your websites? What are your socials? What's going on there?
So my website is herreraforleander.com, and my Facebook is herreraforleander.com. And if you want to email me, I'm mherrera@herreraforleander.com. and my tagline is, I want to make your hometown your destination. Because that's, it's funny. My brother-in-law came and visited, and I told him I was going to be running, and we were driving around, and he said, well, it's this place. We were talking, and every place he named that we'd ever gone to was in Cedar Park.
Right.
For eating and movies and all this. And so it was kind of like, you know what? We need to make our hometown our destination.
Right. No, I think it's a good idea, and I can appreciate the approach. I certainly wish you well in your endeavor. I mean, obviously, good luck to you in the campaign. And I certainly hope that today's conversation has helped you as a voter. And again, as we always do, you can go to voteinleander.com to get information on the election, how it works, register yourself. You still have a few, based on when this is filming, you still have some time to get registered, right? So I think
April 4th.
Yeah, April 4th is the last day to register to vote. For those of you who are new to the city, I think you have to have been here like 30 days, or if you've already changed your driver's license, you are eligible to register, right? So do that, because one of the things that we know here in Leander is not enough people take part in this process. For 100,000 people who live here, It's really it's like paltry. It's like 2 to 5% of that population that's registered to vote. So it ends up translating to like 1% of the total population. There's nothing wrong with that inherently, but you want to be a more well-rounded community. I think that's what I hear from people most of the time. So how do you do that? You get involved, right? And the minimum effort of involvement is vote. Let your voice be heard. People like Michael, people like all the other candidates who are presenting themselves as a representative, that's the point. Like they are representative of a point of view, representative of a particular thought process. And if that's reflective of who you are as an individual, then, that's where you go, right? That's the whole point. So voteinleander.com. You can find Michael at all of his socials. I appreciate your time here today. Thank you so very, very much. And we'll see you guys at the next interview, which is coming up, I think, tomorrow. So see you on the next one, and hope this is helping you make your decisions. That's the intent. Thank you all for your time. Mike, again, thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And we're done here. So that's the end of this episode of Lean In Leander. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
All right.